It was a peaceful Saturday morning when I woke up to a scene I'll never forget. I was living in a beautiful cabin by the lake, nestled among the trees, with nothing but the sound of the water lapping against the shore and the occasional bird call. Life was simple, quiet, and serene. But that morning, I heard something that would change everything. The unmistakable sound of chainsaws, bulldozers, and the hum of heavy machinery filled the air. I stepped outside, rubbing my eyes, and saw something that shocked me to my core. A group of workers, all wearing uniforms, with the HOA, Homeowners Association logo, were tearing down my cabin. Not just any destruction, but they were pulling apart the foundation, cutting down trees around it, and preparing the land for what I later found out was a lake path. At first, I thought I was dreaming. Maybe this was some sort of construction error? Surely this couldn't be happening to me. I rushed over to the construction foreman, hoping there was some mistake, but instead, I was met with indifference. "We have approval from the HOA," he said nonchalantly. "We're building a path for the residents, and your cabin is in the way." My heart sank. How could they do this without even a heads up? I've been living here for years, paid my dues, and followed the rules. Yet here I was, watching the place I had called home for so long being reduced to rubble. After hours of scrambling through old documents, maps, and meeting minutes, I discovered something that left me speechless. Not only did I own the land my cabin sat on, but I also owned the shoreline of the lake. The HOA had been encroaching on my property without realizing it. According to the deed, the shoreline and the strip of land between it and my cabin were legally mine. But that wasn't all. As I looked further into the HOA's original plans, I stumbled upon a hidden clause in the community bylaws that revealed an even more startling truth. I was also the owner of the land where the HOA's clubhouse stood. How had they not known this? How had they been operating on land that didn't belong to them? The more I read through the documents, the clearer the situation became. The HOA, in their rush to build their community amenities, had completely overlooked the legal boundaries that defined property ownership. They assumed the land on which the clubhouse stood and the path they were building to the lake were public areas, part of the community. But in reality, all of that land, including the shoreline where they wanted to build their lake path, belonged to me. They had no legal claim to it, and yet they had been acting as though it was theirs to use. What was even more shocking was that the HOA's executives had been blindly pushing forward with their plans without conducting a thorough investigation into the ownership of the land. There were meetings where they discussed the development of the lake path and the construction of the clubhouse, but they had failed to verify property lines. In all their efforts to improve the community, they had completely ignored the fact that they were trespassing on my property. And now, they were taking it even further by demolishing my cabin without realizing that they were breaking the law in the process. As I continued digging, I uncovered something even more shocking. The HOA had known about the boundaries. They had seen the same maps and documents, yet they chose to ignore them. There was a meeting years earlier where the board had discussed acquiring land for future community projects. The minutes from that meeting clearly indicated that my property was the next in line for expansion, but instead of approaching me or negotiating, they had simply gone ahead and started building, assuming I wouldn't notice or care. The HOA's disregard for my rights was not a mistake. It was a deliberate oversight. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. They had been making decisions on my land without my consent for years, and it had all come to a head with the destruction of my cabin. This wasn't just about a lake path anymore. This was about my property, my rights, and my life. They had treated me like an afterthought in their grand plans, but now I knew I had the power to stop them. I wasn't going to let them get away with this. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that I had every right to challenge the HOA. They had destroyed my property without cause, and they had no legal right to do so. The destruction of my cabin was just the tip of the iceberg. I had the right to demand compensation for the damages they caused, and I wasn't going to let them off the hook so easily. I also had the right to stop their plans for the lake path and reclaim the land that was mine. They couldn't simply trample over my rights and get away with it. But what about the clubhouse? I hadn't forgotten that piece of the puzzle. The HOA's clubhouse sat on land they didn't own, my land. I had every right to claim that property, or at the very least demand compensation for its use over the years. The thought of all the meetings, the community events, and the money they had made off that land without ever paying me a dime filled me with fury. How could they have taken something so valuable without my knowledge or consent? I realized that this wasn't just about personal revenge or retribution. It was about setting a precedent. The HOA had gotten away with this kind of behavior for too long, treating homeowners like they were powerless to stop their plans. But now, I had the law on my side. I had the right to stand up for myself, and I wasn't going to back down. I made a decision then and there. It was time to take action. I would contact a lawyer and begin the process of reclaiming my property and seeking compensation for the damages done. I would fight the HOA with everything I had, and I would make sure they knew that no one was above the law, not even them. I wasn't going to let them continue to operate unchecked, and I wasn't going to let them destroy my home for the sake of their misguided development. I felt a renewed sense of purpose as I moved forward with my plan. I wasn't just fighting for my cabin anymore. I was fighting for what was right. I was fighting for my property rights, for the rights of all homeowners who had been trampled on by the HOA, and for justice. The HOA might have thought they could get away with this, but they were about to find out just how wrong they were. I would make sure that my land, my cabin, and my shoreline were protected, no matter what it took. The battle wasn't over yet. It was just beginning. At that moment, I felt a wave of disbelief wash over me. My stomach twisted as I watched the workers continue their demolition, oblivious to the toll it was taking on me. I had put my heart and soul into this cabin. It wasn't just a structure, it was my sanctuary, the place where I found peace after a long day, the place where I celebrated special moments, and the place where I had built memories with loved ones. And now, it was being torn apart in front of my eyes. In a panic, I quickly dialed the HOA office, hoping that someone there could clarify the situation. The phone rang several times before it was answered by an overly calm receptionist. I explained the situation, expecting her to offer some sort of explanation, but all she did was direct me to a voicemail box, suggesting I leave a message. Frustrated, I hung up and tried calling again, only to be met with more phone trees and dead ends. I was starting to realize that this wasn't just a misunderstanding. This was something far more sinister. Feeling a growing sense of helplessness, I rushed to the HOA office in person. The building was modern and well-maintained, its sleek glass windows reflecting the pristine community around it. Inside, the receptionist greeted me with a practiced smile, her tone cool and professional. I demanded to speak with someone who could explain why my cabin was being demolished. I was ushered into a small meeting room where an HOA representative, a middle-aged man in a sharp suit, sat behind a desk. He listened to my concerns with a bored expression, as though this was just another routine issue for him to handle. When I finally finished explaining the situation, he simply said, "We've received complaints from residents. They want the lake path, and your cabin is in the way." Complaints? What complaints? I asked, my voice shaking with frustration. He shrugged. "It's a community project. The path will benefit everyone. Besides, we've already approved it." He handed me a stack of paperwork, indicating that everything was in order. His tone was dismissive, as though I were overreacting. I was left feeling even more confused and betrayed. This was my home, my land, and I had every right to be upset. How could they just bulldoze it for a path? I stared at the documents in my hands, feeling a growing anger. They were treating this like some sort of trivial issue, but it wasn't. My home was being destroyed, and they weren't even trying to make things right. I asked him how this could have happened without my knowledge. "You should have received a notice," he said, almost as if he were talking to a child. "It's all part of the HOA's plans for the community. The path will improve the view and give everyone access to the water. Improvement? That's when the full weight of what was happening started to sink in. The HOA wasn't concerned with improving the neighborhood. They were concerned with a development project that was more about aesthetics and convenience than preserving what was already there. The path wasn't going to make the neighborhood better." It was going to destroy the very thing that made it special. My home, my memories, and my connection to this place were being disregarded in the name of progress. As the workers continued their destruction, I couldn't help but feel a sense of helplessness. I had paid my dues, followed the rules, and played by their game. Yet here I was, standing on the sidelines while they tore my life apart. It felt like a betrayal. I was not just fighting for my cabin, I was fighting for something much bigger, my right to live peacefully in my own home, without fear of it being taken away for the sake of convenience or the whims of an association that didn't care about the individuals they were supposed to serve. That's when I decided to dig deeper. There had to be something I was missing. Surely, this wasn't legal. Surely I had rights that the HOA couldn't just ignore. I spent the rest of the day combing through property records, zoning laws, and even past HOA meeting minutes. What I found shocked me to my core. This wasn't just a mistake. The HOA was violating my property rights, and I wasn't going to let them get away with it. I knew I had to fight back, no matter what.